Splatoon Raiders now having been released in some parts of the world, the credits are becoming available. And so in this video, I'm going to look, spoiler free, at the credits for this game because I think they are particularly interesting about the current state and the future of Splatoon and for Nintendo in general. So let's have a look through. First of all, let's meet the game director, who those people who saw the developer deep dive for the Ask the Developer interview would recognize as being the director Yoshihiko Ito. He is the sole director on this project. Historically, Splatoon games have had multiple people credited as the director, but that's not the case here. He was previously high in the design credits of both Splatoon 2 and 3 and a system planner for Animal Crossing New Horizon. He was actually, it was revealed in the recent Ask the Developer interviews, a student when the original Splatoon came out, and I think it shows a lot about Nintendo's approach to Splatoon that they want to have somebody so young involved in a quite senior position with Splatoon Raiders. This is, of course, their most young-facing property, and they really need to keep that young audience, so you can absolutely understand why they would be keen to fast-track younger people into development positions within Splatoon. If we look at the game designers, well, I think this gives us a sense of exactly how the split has worked, and we'll see this rough pattern in other credits as well. There are, as I count it very quickly, 35 design credits on Splatoon 3, including Ito as the director, and there are just 21 credits, which excludes Ito, on Raiders. Well, that's just a little over half, and it suggests to me that the other half are probably working on Splatoon 4 and may well be working concurrently with this group. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that this group won't fall back into working on Splatoon 4 once they finish up Raiders. It might not be that the Raiders team is a full-time secondary crew, but it does look a lot like Nintendo are splitting down the Splatoon team, which of course is already a big step forward from where we were only a few years ago when we were speculating on whether or not there was a separate Splatoon team from an Animal Crossing team. I think with the expansions over the last few years, we can pretty much guarantee that there is a major standing Animal Crossing team, a major standing Splatoon team, and within that Splatoon team, they're clearly able to break down into subgroups to work on a title like this. And I have put here the vast majority of the game designers are from Splatoon 3, but evidently about half the staff of Splatoon 3 were not on Splatoon Raiders, so that suggests to you, it gives you a sense of the amount of people still working on Splatoon content right now, assuming they are still there. And the fact that there's such a strong continuity suggests that they're keeping the Splatoon group together. They may be adding to it. If they are adding to it, my guess is that they're going to be adding to it for Splatoon 4, where they'll have more time to bed those people in. Sound-wise, the majority of people on sound for this game did not, as far as I can see, work on Splatoon 3, which is a bit different from other groups. But it should be said that previous games had producers where there were lots of other titles they've worked on, so a lot of the producers of sound content for Splatoon 3 went on to work on Mario Kart World, on Dragon Drive, and my guess is that Nintendo have quite a large amount of crossover with their sound department. But there is the potential here. I'm not sure if it's the actuality. I guess we'll see over future credits. There is the potential, given how big sound and particularly music is to Splatoon, that it could get its own dedicated sound group within EPT5. As it stands, though, there's not a huge number of crossover credits. In terms of programmers, it's a very similar story to the game designers, where we had 43 different people working on Splatoon 3, but only 22 people on Raiders, of which 16 were from Splatoon 3. So that suggests that there is an increase of about a third of that core Splatoon 3 staff that came over to Raiders, and if we saw a similar rate of development with Splatoon 4 as well, then we might expect them to continue to be hiring, not just over the last couple of years, but going on to however long it takes for Splatoon 4 to come out. And so it might be that that team could increase by a third or a half or, even double in time. So clearly there is quite a lot of expansion, but they are keeping that core group. Now, again, it might be the case that they decide that they would rather have that core group working on a spin-off and then build a little bit more around Splatoon 4, where the base is a bit more structured, but we'll have to wait and see with that one. With art, we've got 130 credits on Splatoon 3, 123 on Raiders, so obviously both quite art-intensive games. And although they are credited, it's not completely clear who is from Nintendo Studios Singapore, but having done a deep dive of a couple of them, it's pretty clear that some of the people credited here are people who have past credits and are associated on the internet with Bandai Namco Singapore. So we're pretty confident that these people are the Nintendo Studios Singapore team. And I think it is pretty much an art-only group here. So whether or not Nintendo Studios Singapore have the capability to develop actual games on their own, I guess will remain to be seen. But for the time being, my expectation is that they will be focused on the art side of things and seemingly continuing to be linked with Splatoon, which after all, since they heavily worked on Splatoon 3, only makes sense. Okay, some interesting departments now. So the production management side of things. So we've got three names here. Tomoaki Tsuji, whose previous experience was on New Horizons and Splatoon 3, doesn't have any other particular experience that we can find for Nintendo, and it suggests that he's therefore really part of the core EPD 5 group. We've also got Yoshiteru Fukuda, who was a game designer on Splatoon 2 and 3, but also a hardware designer back on WarioWare Twisted and has done a couple of other things. And then we've got Taketoshi Akimaru, who worked on server network support on Wii Sports Resort, which of course was produced by the same group which is now EPD Group 5 and on New Horizons, but more critically was a game designer on Splatoons 2 and 3. So it's not enormously surprising because these groups, these people have been associated with Splatoon before, but it does suggest that there is a general consistency now in terms of the production management. And I guess that these people will continue to be shepherding multiple games going forward, as Splatoon effectively at this point seems to have its own group. We'll come to that in a second, but just a note on the special thanks. One of the people, of many people thanked in the special thanks credits, is Toshihiro Izuno. Izuno-san is somebody who has quite a history with Nintendo, going back to Wario's Woods and Earthbound in 1994. His last credit was on the ill-fated 3DS game Mario & Luigi Bowser's Inside Story plus Bowser Jr.'s Journey, I should say, but it was not a particularly successful final credit as a producer, given that it was pretty much a massive flop in the late stage 3DS and led to Alpha Dream's sad demise. Nevertheless, he has had previous special thanks on New Horizons, Splatoon 3, and the expansion pass. So what do we conclude from this? Well, in the past, I've taken the view that generally these special thanks probably refer to people who have retired, but who still had an involvement early on. But I doubt that Splatoon Raiders was something which was still being developed around the same time as New Horizons. We know, in fact, from the recent interviews that it was thought of relatively late on. And so my guess is that if we go back to the information that I dug out on my recent video on the retirement pathway that Nintendo puts in place for people over the age of 50, it seems pretty likely to me that Izuno might be working maybe on a much more limited basis because he is approaching retirement but may not still be fully retired, and so he's just checking in and supporting the team, offering advice and support particularly to the younger developers, but perhaps not being significantly involved with the direction of the project. And that's pretty cool that they keep that wisdom around without necessarily having these people be leaders of the production. Special thanks teams, well, there's a number of credits, but in particular we should highlight Nintendo Studios Singapore, because of course it used to be Bandai Namco Singapore but has now been bought out, and this will be the first game which is their credits where they're credited on their new name. Bandai Namco Studios Malaysia was always the kind of partner in crime of Singapore. Obviously the people in Singapore would likely be a lot more expensive to hire, so it would have been a way of defraying costs to outsource some of that work to neighbouring Malaysia and therefore bring the general costs down of the studio itself. The fact that Bandai Namco still own the Malaysian branch obviously works out quite well for them because it means that they continue to profit from the relationship, but I'm sure that works out fine for Nintendo. It's not entirely clear exactly what went on that caused Nintendo to buy Nintendo Studios Singapore. Whether or not they buy the Malaysian studio as well in due time, I guess if there's a need for them to do so, then they may do, but it may just be that they decided that it was worth their while ensuring that Bandai Namco didn't need to sell them, and so they just took them off their hands. Monolith Software also were involved with this, but they have a support studio who do work on other titles, so I don't think it's the core Xenoblade or the core Zelda group, but nevertheless, it's good to see them. And Digital Media Lab Inc., I will mention, it's not a name we come across too often, but is actually a team that works on quite a lot of credits for Nintendo games, and so it's always good to flag them up. Now, the big, and to me the most interesting changes here are to the structure of the Splatoon development team. So here we have the co-producer, Shintaro Sato. Now, Sato has had a very long history with Splatoon, program director of the original Splatoon on 2, 3, and the DLC, was also the director. Now, the meaning of co-producer. Co-producer obviously has a rank that is below that of a producer, let alone a general producer. However, let me just highlight some people who have been co-producers or assistant producers. Yasuyuki Oyagi, who was the director of Nintendogs and Cats, and who has been working on Mario Kart for decades and decades. Kosuke Ibuki, who is actually quite a bit younger as far as I can tell, is the producer of that series, and that's obviously got all the management involvement associated with it. But Oyagi is absolutely at the heart of that team, not just the Mario Kart side of things, but other development games under EPD 9, such as Nintendogs plus Cats. So clearly he is absolutely essential to the working of that team, and personally I'm very interested to see what he comes up with for his next game, assuming he's not on that retirement pathway that other people have entered. And then also Daiki Iwamoto, who we know is the manager of Zelda now. Obviously, Aonuma has the senior overall responsibility, but the day-to-day management, it would seem, from the recent Monolith Soft interview, is with Iwamoto, who, of course, directed Phantom Hourglass, Spirit Tracks, Twilight Princess HD, no, not Twilight Princess HD, Skyward Sword HD. So he is, again, deeply involved, but he's never had a producer credit. He has had an assistant producer credit, but clearly this is still a very, very significant role. So let's not, assume that just because Sato is co-producer rather than producer, he's not going to be very much at the heart of Nintendo's plans here. However, the producer is also somebody who was the director for Splatoon 1 to 3 and the DLC, and the art director. He was also the original game supervisor for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, almost certainly for Splatoon, which kind of gives you an idea of the importance of his role even back then. This is Seita Inoue, and again, when we think of producer, we're really thinking of the very top people at the company. So obviously some of the big names would involve Eiji Aonuma, and previously Yoshio Sakamoto. I think in many respects we're probably thinking in this case of someone a bit more like Kenta Motokura, who was the director of Super Mario Odyssey and worked for a very long time under the team at EPD8, and now has become the producer of that series, and of course also Donkey Kong Bonanza. I think clearly there's a great history here with the Splatoon team. It makes perfect sense for them to be promoted. It's not a massive surprise, but the other upshot of it, and this is something that I did flag up briefly when we looked through the Ask the Developer interview from the other day, and that is that the person most associated with Splatoon, Hisashi Nagami, is now credited as a general producer alongside Shinya Takahashi, who is, of course, the director in charge of the whole of EPD. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that he is stepping up into the same senior position. It has been the case before that people who have a very strong association with one particular project, like Yoshio Sakamoto, like Katsuya Gucci on Animal Crossing, have been given the title of general producer. And my guess is that in the case of Splatoon, it is so specific and so significant that both as a reward, and I'm sure it's well remunerated, as a reward for the great work that Nagami has put in, but also as a reflection of the fact that he probably has a deep knowledge of the property, which Takahashi might not wish to, step on. He's been given the general producer credit. My guess is that also it is of great use to Nintendo to have people besides just, in this case, Takahashi, who have a knowledge of exactly what that role entails, because they do look for contingency planning. Officially, of course, Koizumi, who I don't believe has ever been credited as a general producer, is the number two to Takahashi. He's the general manager of the whole of EPD, while Takahashi is the director in charge of the operation. But obviously, it's helpful to have Nagami there, knowing exactly what's going on, and clearly he will continue to take that role that Iguchi had as the sort of sensei for Splatoon, and perhaps going forward may involve himself with other things. We know he was key to Dragon Drive, and it wouldn't completely surprise me if he ends up becoming the new leader of the whole enterprise once Takahashi retires, bearing in mind that Koizumi, while he's currently the number two, is relatively old to take on a new post like that. He's in his late 50s and may have other interests such as film and other things that he might take on, perhaps taking on more of the Miyamoto role. At any rate, that is the current state of Splatoon at the moment. What's clear to me is that there is a separate Splatoon 4 team that is clearly going to be working away. They may still be many years from producing anything, but it's interesting to see that the Splatoon team is significantly larger. It's also obvious that this is effectively its own group. Technically, they're all credited as EPD5, just like Animal Crossing is, but to all intents and purposes, we're looking at a completely new grouping within Nintendo, with its own producer, with its own co-producer, with its own general producer. It may not have the numbering to reflect it. My guess is that will change as and when the new building is finally put into use, and then that's usually the kind of time when there's a big move, when there's a big transition of personnel, as when Takahashi retires. Well, they'll rejig the numbering, and then I guess Splatoon will probably be completely perforated from Animal Crossing. But for now, that's where we are. It's obvious that Splatoon Raiders is the first of many Splatoon games to come. It's a huge property for Nintendo. It's pretty big internationally, but it's really big in Japan. And personally, I'm very excited to see where it goes and to play Splatoon Raiders. So that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.